All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rockstar Principles podcast live on YouTube. We are episode 117, coming to you live from, I believe the quote today was, perhaps maybe one of the best days of the school year. We're excited to have everyone here for the Learning Summit. We're going to be talking education today, and now's where I'm going to awkwardly step into the picture and join the show.
You could have just let me do the intro.
Yeah, that would have been a lot easier. So we're going to go around the table and introduce ourselves. You guys know me.
Good morning, I'm Sean Wright. I'm the assistant principal, one of the assistant principals here at Downingtown Middle School, and I've worked with this guy for 3+ years now. Live to tell about it.
I'm Susan Spalina. I teach French at DMS and LMS.
I'm Ashley Bonney. I teach Spanish at LMS.
John Ross, principal at Lineville Middle School.
Alan Back is 8th grade history, been at DMS for 8 years now.
Mike Yang, the 8th grade science teacher, here since 2001.
And Jackie Henry, I'm the other assistant principal here at DMS.
So we wanted to have a discussion about education and where education is heading and where it should be heading and things we are all doing. And we have an expert panel of teachers and administrators to discuss that. So we had some discussion prior to starting here, so I want to reference the 2 articles that we have in front of us like we always do on the podcast. One is from eSchool News, and it's called 5 Key Priorities for Today's Superintendents. That's by an author, Laura Ascione, from District Management on September 17th. Then we just pulled an older article about a controversial figure, Elon Musk, and some of the comments he's recently made about artificial intelligence. Now, a conversation isn't about artificial intelligence, but that's a burgeoning science that Musk argues is really where wars will be fought and won, and economies will grow or fail long term with that type of technology. And the idea he's saying is that there's other countries like China and other countries throughout the world that are really putting their eggs in that basket, and they're shifting the way they do education to produce a product with students that can address and tackle those types of high-level projects and things. One of the questions we want to ask, and as we talk about what education should be looking like, are we preparing students in a way that they'll be competitive and successful in the global economy that we're kind of heading towards? At both Lineville and Downingtown Middle School, we focus on the 4 C's, which are skills that students need that are research-driven and proven: critical thinking, creative problem solving, communication, and collaboration. And that goes well beyond just the content driven nature of topics and things that have always been. So I guess we can open and start talking about what our feelings on the educational system are, what we're doing in our classrooms and things, and also what we think about some of the priorities that are identified in the one article from today's superintendents. And just very quickly, those 5 key priorities are engaged citizenship, improving achievement. How do you define achievement? Educator retention, evaluating effectiveness of programming, and college and workforce readiness. So if anyone wants to kind of jump in and kind of start some of our discussion, feel free. I've just talked a lot, so I know it makes it awkward.
I would say the obvious struggle we're facing with trying to do that, and I think we are to a certain extent, but the obvious struggle we're facing is the standards-based accountability environment that we live in that right now focuses on not the 5 C's. It focuses on memorization of content and being able to teach your students certain standards depending upon what state you're in and whether or not you follow Common Core and so forth. So I think we are doing it at a district level, are trying to teach for kids for the future, and I think there's a lot of schools that are, but I think, in my opinion, the overwhelming majority of schools are not. I think the vast majority of schools are still adhering to and following the idea that we have to teach to the test and we have to prepare kids to be ready to take this annual assessment, which in my opinion has nothing to do with preparing them for the future.
So, big picture, and I agree. I think there's pockets of schools and classrooms that are actually embracing the 4 C's and thinking ahead in terms of what do students need when they go to college and beyond. The idea that we're preparing kids for college and the workforce, and are they ready? I don't know that they are. Not in a standards-based content-driven environment. I don't know that that helps them compete, especially in light of what you were saying in terms of AI and things like that. We don't teach AI. There might be a coding club here or there, and we throw laptops at all our kids, but does that mean they understand artificial intelligence? Does that mean they're going to be ready to compete in a global environment with countries that are explicitly teaching that? I don't know that if China is explicitly teaching AI, they're dropping something, right? So what are they dropping? Are they dropping the memorization of content? Who won this war? Who knows the definition of this term? Probably, right? In order to be competitive in a much different environment than we were used to and what we've established here.
And they are actually, I mean, China in particular is moving away from the rote memorization and the rows of desks all facing the same way, kind of old school mentality, and they're actually they're stealing ideas from us as far as how to get kids to be creative and thinking outside the box and doing new and innovative things.
Why memorize anything, right? You can find anything you need
We say
right
all the
here.
time, yeah.
Alan, you did the summer China experience, didn't you, a few years back?
I did. I was just thinking about that, and one of the reasons they brought us to China to do a summer camp where we did English speaking was so that we can show them some of the different ways that we teach here instead of lining up in rows and memorization. They wanted us to do different activities and kind of show some of their teachers just some of the different methods that we use here.
It's total sidebar on that. It's interesting. Like, we're competing with China, yet we're going and helping them too. Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
I was just wondering, like, what else are they not prioritizing that we're prioritizing? Because just time-wise, you only have so much time in a day and so much time to teach particular curriculums. They've got to be choosing something that's kind of getting pushed to the side in order to prioritize artificial intelligence and just moving forward in that sense.
That's what I'm glad you said that, because that's what I'm always thinking, when I see people's social media posts and stuff about how we need to bring tech ed back, and we need kids learning how to do their taxes, and we need kids learning how to build things, and my response always is, okay, well, what are we gonna sacrifice?
Yeah.
What are we gonna cut in order to bring this, because I agree, I'd love to be able to do, and we are, I think, we don't have a formal class, but we're trying to integrate more of that into what we do. But in order to have like actual classes where we do those things, what's gonna get sacrificed to do that?
I'll never forget all the little girls at the camp had a very short bob type of haircut. And I remember asking one of the girls, I said, why does everybody have a haircut? She said most of the schools require girls to have the short haircut because they say if they have long hair, they'll waste time worrying about their hair. So how do you find time? They're finding time one way or another. Yeah.
Wow. There's some time, they're getting paid
Yeah,
some time by
some
doing that.
time.
I'm gonna mention that to my 12-year-old daughter.
Good
In
luck,
the
good
morning,
luck.
we could cut out 2 or 3 minutes.
Of your day by taking the hair apart out.
I do want to mention something, a philosophy foundation that is different with international schools. Lots of the schools, here, everyone can succeed, right? Every child, know the child left behind philosophy. But those countries, you're in a trap, it's early on. So where do we go with? Some kids, not every kid, some kids are meant to memorize and work with that kind of academic setting, traditional setting, and they thrive. And others are in this new, innovative, creative setting, and there really is a need for both. So, but in those countries, if you're not in that high track of AI development and engineering and all those science STEM programs, you're on a different track, and there's a status that comes with that.
Yeah.
There's stigma, and are we ready to handle that? It's hard to meet both. It's definitely, and we have so
And
much
it's-
resources and time.
That's a great point too, Mike, in that because when it comes to the testing that they compare us to, when they talk about how we're falling behind other countries when it comes to assessment, well, a lot of those other countries, the kids that are doing poorly, they've already sent them on a different track, and they're not getting formalized schooling, so they're not even being tested, they're not included. Whereas we're testing every single kid that walks through the door from K to 12.
And the high flyers in Singapore, that's their track. They get that bar model, and everyone's achieving there. We do it for everybody, here. And I appreciate.
But it's the
that,
same
of
thing.
course,
What do you
but
want?
yeah.
Like you can't do both,
Right.
Which do you prefer? Do you want to have a country and a system where we're getting all kids included in it, or do we want to have to start to go back to the older model when I was a kid, probably the oldest one here. When I was a kid, that's more the way it was done. We had kids, it's funny because I hear people in my generation especially say a lot of times, well, kids when we were in school never did that. And I say to them all the time, you didn't see those kids.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like those kids weren't around.
Right.
Kids that were different learners, kids that had exceptionalities, kids that were juvenile delinquents or whatever, they just put them somewhere else. You know what I mean? We would go through our school day thinking, oh, everything's great, we're all doing really well here, when there was groups of kids that weren't even included.
Right.
I just want to mention a lot of immigrant families that we have in America are, they might have not been on that early track. And so a lot of them, I know my family, a number of different families that are from Korea and whatnot, and different international families, they wanted an easy life for their kids, or an easier chance, a chance to develop and prosper. So they came to America, which is a wide opportunity. And so, you know, there is this, some people they weren't on that track early on, so they found a way out to come to get an opportunity to retrack themselves and have better opportunities.
I wanted to add about my experience when I lived in France. By around 8th grade, they have to decide what they want to do for the rest of their life, and they get put on a track. So if the kid wants to get into English, then they don't need math. They don't have to do that. And I'm not really sure what happens if you're unsuccessful, but I don't think that's even an option there. But based on the culture, you have to figure it out. And
Which, Susan, to add to that,
yeah,
one of the things we've talked about on the podcast a lot is Ted Dintersmith, and you guys have all been exposed to some degree to both his books, Most Likely to Succeed and What Schools Could Be. And he argues very strongly that beyond 6th grade math, unless you're going to be a math major or an engineer, like going into that direction, you don't need anything more than 6th grade math. So that it's fascinating that you're talking 8th grade in France, and you can then start. Now, I'm not saying you should have to decide what you want to do with the rest of your life at that age, but correlation's interesting.
sure.
And it's funny you said it because Ron, I think I've had this conversation with you. I know, I've got a daughter who's a sophomore at Temple. I have a son who's a senior in high school right now. And I had the same conversation with both of them going into their upper grades in 11th and 12th grade. They were going to take like AP Calc and I said to them, like, why are you taking that? You know, my daughter's in nursing at Temple. Like, there's some math, but I don't think there's Calc in nursing. And I was like, why are you taking that? She said, well, it's AP and it's going to help. And no. Like, and we're very lucky in the district that we live, and I'm not sure because I'm not familiar with the high school in Downingtown, but they have a class called college math. And it's just that. It's like making sure if you're going to college, here's the math you need to know and nothing more. They don't go in, they do some stats, you know what I mean? Some of that important higher level math, but they don't go into trig and calc and all that stuff. And I think, again, you talk about Dintersmith, that's kind of what influenced me to have those conversations with my kids, and that's more valuable, that's way more valuable than taking some calc class that if you're not going into that field, you're never gonna need.
I would have been in trouble because in 8th grade I was convinced I was going to play professional baseball.
I was thinking most 8th graders do not.
Yeah.
No.
Or if you had left school and focused on that
Maybe I
completely,
would've.
you never know. Maybe you would have played professional baseball. If you had followed that model.
System, I didn't get the,
But
I wasn't
also,
realized.
another thing that I'm thinking about it is that in France, they don't have football teams. They don't have cheerleaders. They go to school, they do what they need to do at school, and then they go home. It's not a
Oh, they don't have
social.
school-based athletic
No,
teams.
they
Okay.
can join a community
It's all club,
team.
right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Schools just
It's
provide.
so hard to compare all these different things, they're all
Yeah.
so different.
And I think that's what a lot of folks outside of education don't realize when they talk about comparing test scores in our schools. You're comparing apples to oranges in a ridiculous, like not even apples to oranges, you're comparing like apples to zucchini. Like it's just like two completely different things.
Systems and.
So, when we were talking about that with the club and the sports part, it brought a thought up, especially with when you're talking about 8th graders and where they want to go. And Alan, I think you'd be the best one to offer some insight on this. So you were a collegiate athlete, played football at Villanova, and then had some NFL,
A workout.
Workout.
Quick workout, that was it.
Well, my point,
It's more than Sean got for the Phillies.
my point being, that was in your head the whole time you went through your the K-12 process to some degree. So
Yes.
how, when you went through, did you feel the system prepared you for the possibility of achieving that goal on the athletic side, but also for the inevitable, and I hate to say a fallback, but to prepare you for real life should that not work out?
I wouldn't say the system. I would kind of give more credit to like my mother,
Okay.
family, coaches who, always kind of prepared you that, that is a, slim chance at any type of professional sport. You never know what could happen. You could become injured. You could become, get cut or whatever. And, you need to have something else. They say the NFL, and this is something my, family and coaches always tell me, stands for not for long. So the average career is 2 to 5 years. So there's even if you did make it, you still need to have something else that you're, kind of able to do. So it was I always looked at it more, especially when I got to college, was more of a, if the opportunity came, I would take it, but this is what I want to do once I, finish school.
Awkward pause.
I think that's another good point you're saying, your mom, your family. We don't know necessarily what most of our kids are coming in with as far as support systems go. And obviously, a lot of it can be up to us because we see them every day, but a lot of it is not up to us because we don't know what's going on in the house and in the home. And so, again, comparing apples to zucchini, we don't know what's the culture like for academics in China and France. Like, that's another huge way that we can be different from other countries.
Question for the teachers in the room, and Jackie, you've just recently made that transition to the dark side, so very applicable to you too. When you look at your teaching in the classroom, and you look at the way, what you're supposed to accomplish from a curricular perspective, from teaching at the middle level, which is very social, emotional, behavioral, and academic, do you feel that it's balanced well? Do you feel that it's skewed and you can't accomplish what you're expected to accomplish? And most importantly, here's the real meat of the question, do you do in your classrooms what you really think is right in terms of what you feel the kids need, even if it's outside the curriculum?
Pretending your evaluators aren't sitting in the room.
No.
So I'll start the conversation. Even when you were talking about it a little bit earlier about achievement and standardized tests, I always feel like good teaching is going to reflect on a test anyway. So if you have kids engaged, you have kids wanting to learn more, if they're learning those 4 C's, those kids are going to perform better on a standardized test anyways. So I think the focus needs to be good teaching, and especially at the middle level with our kids coming in with so much additional outside influences, focusing on the kid and what the kid needs at the moment is way more important than preparing them for a standardized test. And I think doing that is only going to reflect positively on the standardized test anyways. I don't know how you guys feel.
I mean, and play devil's advocate for a minute, like, I've heard people say, well, our process and methods have been around for 80+ years for a reason, so what if we're wrong? What if this push for 4 C's and this re-envisioning the way we do things doesn't pan out and isn't necessary? Then what?
Well, and I think it's similar to what Jackie was saying. I mean, I know you asked teachers on this part, but I want to support what Jackie was saying in that what we're doing, like by changing that focus, it's not going to hurt them. And I feel like sometimes the continued focus on the standards and the testing is going to hurt them. And I've had this conversation with Nick several times about how I feel, the years, and we have been there, where we've spent years doing PSSA prep, and let's address the standards, and let's pump the kids up, and let's put all the focus on all the pressure on PSSA. And what's that do? Moves the needle 2%, 3%, maybe 5% at best, right?
Yep.
But at what cost? At what cost are you moving that needle? Whereas if we spent the time worrying about culture and worrying about supporting our kids and making sure they're their best selves when they sit down to take the test, it could also do that. It might not, but it's certainly not going to decrease it. I don't see how that could move any more than 1 or 2% in a negative direction. You're not going to lower your scores by 20%. You know what I mean? By doing that.
To your point, the one quote from that our book study last summer was the idea that we pretty much grinded the joy and fun out of learning in the test prep model. It's like, I don't wanna be a part of that.
And I think what Jackie said, definitely, I definitely agree with. And what the 4Cs does provide opportunities for those who aren't really wired for the traditional setting. So that at least gives them opportunity to shift into a more positive view of the classroom experience and learning. And I think myself, I'm bound to the standard-based lessons, and internally you're pressured with, gotta keep moving along, get everything covered. But peppering in as much as I can the 4Cs activities, so that you're really hitting, as many gamuts of people, members in the classroom, so that everyone gets a positive experience. So I think that's one way I try to hit the 4Cs. It's not this whole complete shift, it's not a whole paradigm shift, but it's meant internally, but you really want to meet the diverse learning environment that you have, the people in front of you, the students in front of you.
And just a real quick piece on the 4Cs, we know, because it wasn't, and you guys know it wasn't willy-nilly. There's a tremendous amount of research that has identified those 4Cs as the most necessary skills for students to acquire to be successful in any field. You know what I mean? And that's, we think it's common sense, and it is to a degree, but it's research, it's backed. You know what I mean? Like, so we know those things. I mean, when I look at you guys, and actually, you're the only one I don't know inside of the classroom. I don't care about any of your content, and I don't mean that flippantly at all. But I care about, are you reaching the kids, developing the relationships, and then helping them to do those things? You know what I mean? Can they, Alan, we were talking, we had a meeting 2 days ago where we were talking about the public speaking aspect, right? And some people would disagree with your philosophy. So the kids do a quick elevator speech on whatever the topic is that related to history, tied to the content. If they give the speech in front of the whole class, they full credit regardless of the content, was it?
Well, the maximum score, so it's an elevator speech. So we kind of took that business model of you should have a quick 30 to 45 second speech where you can sell yourself. And they had to do that as an abolitionist. So they had to pick an abolitionist, research that abolitionist, and then come up with the key things about this abolition. If I was this person, how would I sell myself in a quick 30 to 45 second interview? And for the communication part, so they have to critically look at the research and figure out what's important. For the communication part, I give them the option to present it in front of the class. The maximum score you could get if you do that is 100. So you are going out there, you're in front of the class, you memorize it, you get graded on your tone and everything. If you present it to just me outside of the class, the maximum score you could get is a 90. So if you did everything right, but you just presented it outside, you still could get an A, but it's not as high as an A as somebody who presented it in front of the class. And then the other option is you could record it and upload it, and this way I tell the kids, like, I don't know if you have the paper when you record it, but you still could read very well and work on speaking, even if you're just reading a piece of paper. And if you get everything right there, the maximum you could get is an 85, which is a B. So and even when I ask the kids, I say, so who's all going to try? You get a lot more kids who are still more willing to try. Like, oh, I want to go for the 100. I want to try to get the 100, and they go for the presentation.
And that's a great example, and I'm sure everybody's doing stuff similar to that now. Again, the people outside of education probably don't realize of something where when I was in school would have been, here's the names of all the abolitionists, here's the descriptors, and draw a line connecting them.
Yeah,
Or you know what I mean? Like, it would have been a much
yeah.
more traditional way of teaching and getting you to memorize, and then as soon as you're done with that test, you forget about it and you move on to something else. Whereas if I'm taking the place of that person and I'm having to actually make an argument that supports them, that's something that's going to stick with those kids much, much longer than a worksheet where they're just connecting two things.
Go ahead, Sue.
What Alan said is something that we kind of debate a little bit in the world language department as a district. We want the kids to feel comfortable speaking the language, not worrying about, oh, is my grammar perfect, or do I have the right vocabulary? So a couple of us have started just having the kids have to do a speech, just speaking, and did they get their point across? Was I able to understand it? Because the majority of my students are not going to be French majors. I would rather them be able to go to France and know how to read a menu, order from a menu, and feel comfortable doing it, instead of getting that stigma that everyone's going to laugh at you if you say something wrong, or how funny you sound, things like that.
Can I build on that with
Certainly.
a Susan example? So, Susan ran a class for us last year. We were blessed to have the opportunity to do it because we don't always get these types of chances, where our students in the life skills program and some of our higher level needs students with autism took a world language experience class
Wow.
with Susan. I'll let you build on it, but to set the stage for it, one, it's an experience they otherwise wouldn't have gotten, right? But we already know going in that those students can't traditionally receive the curriculum at any of the levels you would normally teach
Right.
it. However, Sean and I last year in particular would get to see, because you would send them to us, with their products, what they created, the cultural pieces, that to me that said, what more valuable these kids were communicating, they were working together, they were collaborating, and they learned, they were creating, that was culturally related. So I mean, just to touch, if you reflect on that experience a little bit.
Absolutely, and I tried to do things that were things that they could do, tearing, beating, measuring. We practiced measuring with sugar, and that was just play sugar, like we didn't actually use it for baking.
Wellness policy.
But things that they might need in order to be successful. And some of the more verbal kids made connections. Like we had Gray, who was able to make the connection with piñatas at a time when we did it in maybe November, and when we talked about it again in May. And that was a really cool experience for me, knowing that they built on that knowledge and did learn something that they did, again, like you said, didn't have experience, or would not have had the experience of doing.
And those kids were so proud
Yes.
to come show us their,
Oh,
products.
I miss them.
All about it, so it's great.
I just keep thinking as I'm listening to everybody talk that, for me anyway, it boils down to, I feel like I'm doing everything right if I'm instilling confidence in them and whatever the subject matter is. I mean, 9 years ago, I was teaching math in a district that never made AYP and was always struggling to come up with funds for other programs. And so teaching math in a place like that, there was a lot of please teach to the test, please teach to that test kind of thing. And I always try to put a spin on it as I'm going to try to get them to feel confident in the subject matter, whatever it was. And then they're going to be a lot more willing to participate and to enjoy themselves. And so now having a totally different experience where I'm getting to teach Spanish, I still want to try to do the same things. Like the goal is still confidence. It's still instilling in them that it's more important that they can go to another country and ask where the bathroom is and have a conversation about the weather than it is that they're getting every single little verb tense perfect. So I think if all of us can just build up their confidence, whether it's reading or history or world language, then they're going to be a lot more engaged and a lot more willing to participate and take some risks.
And I think one of the things on the top 5 priorities for superintendents, the first one is engaged citizenship. And from the history's perspective, that's something that I have definitely, when I look at what am I doing, is if what am I doing going to help my students become better, citizens, because instead of just teaching history and being able to apply it as citizens. And if you look at just some of the 4 C's, that is a major part of just being a good citizen in our country, where you are asked to critically think about candidates for elections, when you're asked to communicate problems or come up with problems. I know last year, and I was a little scared about doing it because it's such a touchy subject. We finished up our Civil War study, and I said, I proposed to them the question of what should you do with Confederate monuments, because that has been a huge debate. And I didn't ask them what did they.
You're a brave man.
Yeah. But I didn't ask them what did they think, what was their opinion. I kind of phrased it as create a solution to the problem. This is what's happening, create a solution. And we had like a town hall meeting. And so each person had to kind of come up and share, or each group had to come up and share what they came up with their solution. And it was just amazing when you phrase it that way to see some of the kids, and even just that 8th grade young kid perspective, this is such a big problem. They should move them here, or open up a museum, put them all there, put them, it was just that, and a lot of people had the same, but it was more of a solution. And so that 4 C's of, instead of just fighting back and forth about the problem, I said, we're not going to have a debate, we're not going to sit here and make you have to choose this side. Come up with what you think is a solution to the problem.
Creative problem solving.
Yeah.
Creative problem solving.
So we just have a couple minutes left. And one of the things that was in the superintendent list, I wanted to slightly change the subject a little bit, slightly, but one of the top priorities for superintendents is educator retention. There's a dark looming crisis, dark cloud over education right now that is about to burst. The rain cloud is about to burst of a teacher shortage. Fortunately for us in Pennsylvania, it's not as bad as in other states across the country, and even more fortunately for us in Downingtown, we still do pretty well when it comes to when we have openings. We've noticed a decrease in number of applicants, but we're still able to find Exhibit A, great folks to come on board. But why do you think that is? Why do you, and do you know people that have left the profession? Do you have colleagues that have left the profession, or from your perspective? I mean, I know we have our opinions and we've talked about it as administrators, but as teachers, people on the front lines, why do you think it is becoming so difficult to find people, to get people to go into education?
I'll gladly start. When I was deciding to come back to work, all of my girlfriends that are still in classrooms were telling me, don't do it. Why would you go back? Don't do it. They're miserable. None of them are in this district. Because they're just so beaten down, like especially the teachers that are teaching math and language arts. They are just so beaten down by the requirements and the expectations, and the idea that if their kids don't get certain scores, then they are terrible teachers. When there are so many other contributing factors than just what that teacher's doing in the classroom. The amount of paperwork, and just there's so many things that they're still there because they need the job. They need the money and the health insurance, but they hate what they're doing, and they all try to convince me to find something else. They're like, change careers, do something else. But unfortunately, this is what I wanted to do since I was 5, so there was no doubt I was going back. But it scared me, I won't lie. It made me nervous.
I wonder if some of it has to do with Teach for America, and you have teachers going into, poorer schools and schools that aren't performing as well, and having that poor experience, the bad experience, and deciding that they don't want to stay there after they do their years that they need to do for Teach for America, and then they leave, and there's no stability for those kids that are in that district.
And to back up what you're saying, in the article it said the concern was even higher for urban superintendents. There's 65% of them compared to 50% of the suburban superintendents said that was an area of concern. Other folks with opinions why that is, or you kind of agree with what they had to say?
I think of sometimes the cost of college also. Even so, I was fortunate enough to go to Villanova on a football scholarship, but I would think if I would to have tried to pay and then come out on a teacher salary, the math doesn't add up there. So to go to, especially if you don't have the means or your parents aren't able to pay for college, you're taking on all these loans to then come out and make barely enough money to survive, pay the loans, live. It's maybe just not as attractive option for people when it comes to looking down the road financially. Am I going to be well off if I go into this field?
And I mean, around here, I think it's pretty, salaries are pretty good and competitive, but you hear about teachers in like Arizona or Florida, and they're coming out of college and getting, $28,000 a year.
We're having to work 2 or 3 jobs on top of all that we do.
I mean, why would you want to do that?
And their friends are probably telling them you're crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, even if they had the passion as a high school kid, then they're thinking about doing it. Their families or their friends, their people in their life are saying, dude, you gotta look, you're only gonna make 28 grand a year, you're gonna have this much debt, it's gonna take you 10, 12 years
You need your
before
masters and,
The first thing I thought of was student teachers and the majors the kids fill out when they get to college. And I feel like there's been a trickle-down effect where maybe the saturation of this locally at least, in like Westchester, the number of student teacher placements has decreased, and the number of students that are putting down as their major education has decreased just because of the saturation, at least in this area. And then where are you forced to go? Out, and it comes in the lower socioeconomic group, cities and schools, and the pay is lower. So I just feel like there's been this rumor that's gone down where education is not worth it for a lot of people.
And it's good that you bring that up too about the colleges. I forget the statistic, but you know, the Pennsylvania, what's it, the PSAC or whatever, Westchester, Millersville, East Stroudsburg, that association of all those universities that are major teaching sources of education, their number of teaching majors has plummeted. So it's not just that there's fewer teachers that are out there that are looking for jobs, there's fewer kids going into programs. They're cutting programs left and right. Because
Last
there's
year-
just so many less kids getting into it.
Last year, there was one graduate in Pennsylvania with a tech ed
For the
degree,
tech ed degree.
certification,
In
one
Pennsylvania?
In the whole, yeah,
in the whole state.
yeah, probably out of Millersville, because
I
that's,
think
that
it
was
might have been,
probably, that's what one of their big programs is tech ed, yeah. Scary
Or
thought,
AI.
scary thought,
Right.
with job security for you guys at least, knowing that. All right, what do you think, Dr. Nick? Is that about?
Take us home, John,
Take us home?
wrap it up.
Wow, no pressure. Well, thank you to our panel for joining us today. You know, we record on the weekends, Saturday mornings at my house. Anybody ever wants to join in? I mean, you guys really added a lot to what we do, so we appreciate you guys taking the time. Thanks to our school district. You know, we didn't really spend enough time, I don't think, Nick, talking about today in our district. We're having a learning summit, which is a non-traditional day of professional development where our teachers get an opportunity to pick and choose from a menu list of hundreds and hundreds of different options. And we were fortunate that these folks chose to be with us today. So thanks to our district for having this, I think, pretty innovative form of professional development. Shout out to John Blow for all of his hard work in putting that together. And that'll be it for this edition of the Rockstar Principals Podcast. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.